Recently, I had Mark Millar on the Comics Aficionados. He had some very interesting things to say about the comic book industry and some of the failures that are happening right now, and actually had some great recommendations on how to make things better. And that has upset some people, and they've accidentally trying to rebuke him, proving him right. Here to talk to me about that is my good friend Doc. How you doing, buddy?
Oh God, I there's some days that you make me read an article and I just sit there and I go, how are you people this fucking stupid? And this is one of those days. I don't know who wrote this article, somebody at comicbook.com or CBR.
He used to write for Wizard. It's in his bio.
Okay, well, that doesn't make him less of an idiot. This whole entire article is predicated on the idea that somehow one-hit wonders make a successful industry.
Basically, they're upset about the part where he said we need to bring the old creators back, the ones that have firmly established themselves and moved on. They need to come back, do a couple more series in light of fire because DC aren't doing as well, Marvel aren't doing as well, and that impacts other people, specifically creator-owned work. And we haven't had anything amazing that was like a phenomenon and really broke out since Saga and Walking Dead before that. That was the big controversial statement, which anybody with two functioning brain cells knows is actually what's going on. This is what comicbook.com had to say. Listening to him talk, the market sounds pretty dire. He talks about comics retailers who are struggling to keep their heads above water and claims there are only a couple of good books at Marvel or DC at one time. No longer enough to force the audience to make hard choices with their dollars. Barely even enough to motivate people in through the comic shop doors, and his prognosis for creator-owned books isn't much better. I don't really understand how anybody can listen to what Mark said and take any offense to it whatsoever. We're seeing publishers shut down altogether. IDW and Valiant are basically on their last legs. Even some of the writers at Marvel and DC are admitting we're not selling nearly as many comic books as we used to. We're hearing from dozens of retailers right now, I can no longer make money selling comic books. I have to make money on shirts. I have to make money on tabletop gaming, all sorts of other stuff because there isn't enough interest in comic books themselves right now. We actually have the whole hashtags comics broke me where half the industry cried out in unison about how terrible things are and how none of them are making money. Yet somehow Mark Millar's the bad guy here for having suggestions.
Yes, everything about what you just said is 100% accurate. And the fact is, all these people don't want to accept it. They don't want to put all the puzzle pieces together and accept that, because the only possible retrospective that could come out of that is, oh, fuck, we broke comics. We broke the industry because we got what we wanted in every conceivable way. We got our buddies in there. We got books that were artsy fartsy as being the main driver of what publishers are putting out. It ended up breaking the industry. They got what they wanted, and the only people that, if they actually put all the pieces together, look back at it, have a little bit of reflection on what's going on, the only possible conclusion they could come to is, fuck, we did this to ourselves. And that is something that they refuse to do, because God forbid any of these dumb sons of bitches take responsibility for the consequences of their actions.
And they definitely take a lot of umbrage, I guess, with him saying that there really hasn't been this breakout creator-owned book since Saga. And obviously, when Mark Millar's talking about breakout, we're talking phenomenon. Something that can go on and sell for 40 issues straight. Something that breaks down the barriers of the comic book shop doors and goes and finds its own audience and brings new people in. Really, the only two things in the last 15 years creator-owned, you're talking about The Walking Dead because of the TV show, and then Saga. A lot of people like that series. And it certainly has been a phenomenon of itself. But they try to provide this list that Rich Johnston put together, and it's so embarrassing. They don't even realize what they're actually proving with this. It's been more than a decade since Saga dropped, and Image's 20th anniversary faded into its 30th. In that time, if Saga was the last mega hit they had, that would be a pretty terrifying thing. But our friends over at Bleeding Cool have done a pretty sharp breakdown of some actual numbers that tell a bit of a different story. Maybe not quite as different as it first appears at face value, but certainly not as cut and dried as Millar presents it. It makes sense it would come from Johnston, who for years has had his own in-house bestseller list and seems more interested than almost anyone else covering comics in trying to figure out the real numbers. The list in question is Image's in-house list of the 25 best-selling launch titles, #1 issues since 2012. No one has ever claimed that you can't spike a number or make a little profit on a #1 issue. And they're saying, all of these debuted between 80,000 and 500,000, absolutely astronomical numbers. And of course, the ones that are at the top of the list are like the Spawn-related 1 in 2,500 variant covers with the signed Todd McFarlane covers, which I don't think it's very healthy for comic books to have a comic book that ships 500,000 copies and sells 50,000 of them, and you just have 450,000 orphans sitting out there that nobody wants to buy. That's not actually healthy for comic books, and certainly not healthy for retailers. And then the list itself is so embarrassing. There aren't really that many high quality titles in there. They even have like Mother of Madness in there. That is not a best-selling comic book. And sure, Spawn has found its niche, but for the most part, none of these ended up finding an audience long-term. They did one issue that was good. Hopefully they did 2 or 3 more, and then they fell into obscurity.
The only metric that matters is month-to-month steady draw for a long period of time. And what is this list of? A bunch of shit that was like, had big sales on a #1 issue or had a bunch of variants on a number issue, and it sells on one fucking book. This is like calling musicians that can sell a single song on iTunes a success. Those are one-hit wonders.
Who has been arguing that the speculator market isn't the only thing that's really working right now?
We're the only people that are constantly talking about how the only thing that really works out there is the speculator market. And even that is having the law of diminishing returns kick it right in the goddamn teeth on a regular basis at this point. This market is in a major downturn because, 10 years ago, or even 3-4 years ago when that Spawn 300 came out with all the tens of thousands of variants and the Spawn Universe #1 and the King Spawn and the Scorch, they sold big numbers a couple of years ago, but even all the stores now, they're still, the publishers are still trying to do that shit. But guess what? They're not getting people to take the bait anymore. They're not getting as many of the stores willing to artificially bump orders. That's why even whenever they do have a new #1, it's not selling as well as the #20 on 2 volumes ago.
And it's interesting. They finally do give Mark Millar a little bit of credit, but then try to discredit him by claiming that Dogman is the same thing as Batman and Saga and Walking Dead. Where Millar may have a point is in the idea of Saga becoming a phenomenon. It's a book with staying power. It's a book that has had success in the bookstore market, and it's a book that people continue to buy and talk about, even though it just finished a lengthy hiatus. It's easy, especially without hard sales numbers to compare, to position that against McFarlane's Spawn spinoffs and say, well, they didn't really hold the attention of the audience in the same way, even if they sold way more #1s. But all of those things you can say about Saga are also things that you can say about a half dozen properties that originated outside the direct market, where Big Nate and Dogman and anything by Raina Telgemeier will do numbers that blow the direct market comics out of the water. So we're back to Scholastic's doing well, so comic book shops are doing well.
Yeah,
Scholastic is doing great, so Image isn't doing so bad.
Yeah, this is the same fucking obfuscate the topic, throw a bunch of unrelated shit in there to muddy the waters so that we could try to make a bunch of idiots actually believe our thesis here. Saga was a phenomenon in that it sold on a month-to-month basis, not in bookstores. Yes, that was the gravy on top. But guess what? It sold month to month to month to month to month in the comic shop. That's what Mark's talking about, because we're talking about fucking comic shops here.
That's the thing, Doc. They know what we're talking about. When I say comic book industry on this channel, I'm talking about the direct market. I'm talking about traditional U.S. comic book publishers. I'm not talking about kids' graphic novels. I'm not really talking about manga. We're talking about the traditional market itself as it's shrinking year by year because of mismanagement by a lot of these publishers. And then they just act like they don't know what we're talking about, even though it's 100% clear the direction that we're talking about and specifically what we're saying at that moment, but they don't have an argument for that. So they just keep going, well, I'm not really even sure what he's talking about. Look at the sales on Dogman. Everything's great.
It's a whole bunch of unrelated shit that they start throwing in They make this one little connection in that, hey, you know, Saga was actually driving people to the comic shop on a month-to-month basis. But it also did well in the bookstore market. So let's start talking about bookstores here. Completely muddy the waters of this conversation. Nobody here is discounting the success of Dogman and Rain at Telgemeier. Guess what? They do well. They are not the direct comic book market. What Mark is talking about is the direct comic market and being able to get people in the fucking door every Wednesday. Not show up at a bookstore at fucking Barnes and Noble every 6 months. Those are not the same thing.
Yeah, because I'm not anti Barnes and Noble. I'm not anti, Amazon or Walmart or whatever. But I could really give a fuck about those enormous corporations. I care about the health of the direct market, and I actually care about small comic book shops, local comic book shops sticking around and not destroying our culture. These guys know what we're talking about, but they, there's no way to argue it, so you just have to change the argument and hope no one notices.
Yeah, because that's what all of these idiots do every single time there's anything out there that challenges whatever narrative or would require them any degree of self-reflection. I'm going to muddy everything up so that we can go, well, nobody's ever really going to know, I guess, because, DC didn't release the numbers on Spawn versus Batman. This one shot, that totally would have been a way to drive people into the comic shop every week for that one comic that is never going to have a second issue. Yeah, totally. That's it. Yep. Let's just go with whatever retarded fucking logic these people come up with in each of their articles. I swear to God, it's like arguing with a goddamn kindergarten, some of these morons.
If you have not seen the live stream in question, I actually did a video. I decided to remove what I thought was the best stuff, specifically talking about what this article was referring to, also some Superman stuff like that. If you haven't seen this, it's absolutely amazing. Mark Millar is a complete genius, comic book legend, and he really is so honest in here. It's amazing. You got to see this one right now. There's also a link in the video description.